You know, have you ever looked at some of the great strategists in business, in life, whatever, and it's like they're just seeing a different world? It's not magic, not at all. They're just using a set of really powerful mental models, and a lot of them come from timeless strategy games. So today, we're going to unpack 7 of these so you can start thinking like a strategic genius too.
But first, let's start with a really important question. Do you ever feel like you're just reacting all the time? Just constantly putting out fires, answering emails, dealing with one crisis after another? If that sounds familiar, well, you're definitely not alone. The very first step in thinking strategically is to go from being a piece on the board to being the player who sees the entire game. All right, let's get into it.
So, our first section is all about mastering the board. I mean, before you can make some brilliant game-winning move, you have to get the fundamentals right. You have to understand your position and see the landscape for what it really is.
Okay, model number 1 is an absolute classic. Control the center. In pretty much any game you can think of, from chess to business, there's always a central point that gives you the most leverage. When you control that center, you can influence the entire system. You can reach any part of the board you need to, and you can do it with the least amount of effort. It really is the ultimate power position.
So, how does this actually work in the real world? Well, the whole point is to find that one spot where your effort produces the biggest return. Think about startups, right? So many of them are just chasing fast growth, thinking that's the center of the game. But the real power, the true center, is often controlling the distribution. Amazon didn't just sell books, they were obsessively mastering logistics. That was their center. So the question for you is, in your world, where's the center of the board? And what do you need to put there to win?
Now this next model, it completely flips a common way of thinking on its head. We tend to think about strength in these absolute terms. You know, who has more money, who has more talent. But strategy teaches us that the real value of any piece, or any person for that matter, is all about its position, not its raw power. And that's the big shift in thinking. You got to stop asking who's stronger and start asking who's in a better position. Because think about it, an average specialist who's sitting at a critical bottleneck in a project, they are way more valuable than a superstar who's working on some secondary task. It's all about putting the right piece in the right place to create a massive advantage.
Okay, so once you have a handle on your own position, the next level is to start influencing your opponent. Strategy is not a solo sport, right? It's this dynamic dance of action and reaction. And it's all about controlling the flow of the entire game.
And that brings us to a super critical, but often overlooked idea, tempo. You see, strategy isn't just about what happens, it's about when it happens. By controlling the pace, by speeding things way up or slowing things right down, you force everybody else to react to your rhythm. It completely throws off their plans and puts them on the back foot.
The whole goal here is to control how the game is played without ever getting into a direct fight. I mean, think about a company that suddenly accelerates a product launch when all its competitors were expecting a delay. Or in a negotiation, just imagine the power of taking a long, deliberate pause when everyone expects an immediate answer. That silence? It can totally change the game. So where could you use a change of pace to your advantage?
Now let's talk about a more subtle tool of influence, the threat. A truly great strategist knows that the potential for action can be way more powerful than the action itself. See, an unrealized threat forces your opponent to tie up their own resources, and it limits their options, all before you've even made a single move against them.
This is all about shaping someone's behavior without having to escalate things. For instance, if you're in a negotiation, just having well-researched alternatives that you never even bring up gives you this quiet confidence that your opponent will absolutely sense. It keeps them on edge, constantly guessing, and makes them way more likely to give you what you want.
All right, now for one of the most counterintuitive ideas of all. Our gut instinct tells us to defend everything, right? Show no weakness. But a strategic genius knows that a sacrifice isn't a loss, it's actually the price you pay for a better position. By deliberately showing a minor weakness, you can actually dictate exactly where your opponent is going to attack. See, the whole point here is control. You're forcing them to play your game. A classic example is in a negotiation, you concede a minor point to make your opponent feel like they've won, right before you lock in the major issue that you cared about all along. So you have to ask yourself, what can I afford to give up to gain something way more important?
And that brings us to our final section, the most advanced level of strategy. These are the kinds of moves that, to an untrained eye, they honestly look like mistakes. But in reality, they are the secret pathways to an almost inevitable victory.
This is all captured in one of the most beautiful concepts in all of strategy. It's a word called Zugzwang. It's a German chess term, and it describes a situation where you've maneuvered your opponent into a spot where any move they make just makes their situation worse. You're not even attacking anymore. You're just waiting. Look, this isn't about one single brilliant move. It's about creating an outcome that is basically inevitable. Here's how it works. First, you create a situation that forces them to respond. Then, you make sure that every possible response they could make only helps you. And finally, you just sit back and let their own move become their undoing. It is the ultimate checkmate.
Okay, our final model, and this one challenges our deepest, most primal instincts. It's often the hardest move to make, not on the board, but in your own head. And that move is the retreat. Every fiber of your being screams to push forward, to fight back, to hold your ground. But real strategy sometimes demands the courage to take a deliberate step back.
Just look at the difference between these two mindsets. On one side, you've got instinct, and it's screaming that stepping back is weak, that it's a loss. But on the other side, you've got strategy, and strategy sees it for what it truly is, repositioning. By retreating, you free up your resources, you get out of a bad spot, and you prepare for a much stronger counterattack down the line. It's about winning the war, not just one little battle.
So after going through all of these models, it's so important to remember one thing. These aren't some rigid set of rules you have to follow. They're a toolkit, and the real core skill of any great strategist isn't just knowing the rules, it's adaptation.
Adaptation is really a state of mind. It's having the ability to change your whole approach without losing sight of your ultimate goal. It means you can abandon a plan that isn't working without your ego getting in the way. And most importantly, it's being able to adjust your strategy faster than your opponent can even figure out what game you're playing. Strategy creates the advantage, but adaptation is what lets you keep.
So now the real question lands squarely on your shoulders. You've seen the models, you get the mindset. I want you to look at the board of your life, your career, your current project. Your next move is critical. So which model are you going to use?